Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Phantom Portrait Painter. Holly Arnold had always been drawn to the haunting beauty of the Isle of Wight. The cliffs, the forests, and the old, ivy-clad houses seemed to whisper secrets to her as she painted. She moved there to escape the noise of London, seeking solace and inspiration in the island's tranquil, yet eerie landscape. It was in this strange place that her art would take a dark and unforeseen turn. Holly's studio was an old barn at the edge of a small village, a place that had seen better days but possessed a rustic charm she couldn't resist. She spent her days painting the scenery, the old churches, the stormy sea, anything that caught her eye. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over her canvases, she felt an inexplicable urge to paint a portrait. It was as if invisible hands guided her brush, compelling her to create. Her hand moved with a life of its own, capturing the likeness of an elderly man she had never seen before. His eyes, though lifeless, seemed to bore into her soul, and his thin lips were set in a knowing smile. When she finished, Holly stepped back, shivering despite the summer heat. The man's face looked uncannily real, as if he could step out of the frame at any moment. News of her portrait spread quickly. People came from all over the island, bringing photographs of their departed loved ones, hoping Holly could immortalize them on canvas. With each painting, her reputation grew, and so did the whispers. People spoke of her gift as a curse, of her studio being a place where the veil between the living and the dead was dangerously thin. One night, as Holly cleaned her brushes, she heard a knock at the door. A tall, gaunt man stood on her doorstep. His eyes were dark and piercing, and his presence sent a chill down her spine. "Good evening, Miss Arnold," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "My name is Nathaniel Blackwood. I've heard of your remarkable talent and have a proposition for you." He handed her an old, weathered photograph of a young woman with sad, haunting eyes. "This is my sister, Eliza. She passed away many years ago. I would like you to paint her portrait." Something about Nathaniel unnerved Holly, but she couldn't refuse. She agreed to paint Eliza, though she felt a strange foreboding as she took the photograph. The next day she began the portrait. As she worked, she felt an oppressive presence in the studio, as if unseen eyes watched her every move. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to twist and stretch in unnatural ways. When she finished, Eliza's face looked out from the canvas, her eyes filled with sorrow and something else, desperation. That night Holly dreamed of Eliza. She stood at the foot of Holly's bed, her eyes pleading. "Help me," she whispered. "He's using you." Holly awoke in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. She tried to shake off the dream, but Eliza's face lingered in her mind. The next morning, Nathaniel returned to collect the portrait. He looked at it with a disturbing satisfaction. "Magnificent," he murmured. "You've captured her perfectly." As he left, Holly felt the wave of nausea. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. She began to dig into Nathaniel's past and discovered a chilling truth. Nathaniel Blackwood was a collector of souls, using portraits to trap the spirits of the dead. Eliza wasn't his sister, she was his prisoner. Determined to free Eliza and stop Nathaniel, Holly decided to confront him. She followed him to his mansion, a decrepit old house on the outskirts of the island, shrouded in fog and mystery. Inside, she found room after room filled with portraits, each one a face twisted in torment. Nathaniel caught her in his gallery of the damned. "You should have stayed away, Miss Arnold," he said, his voice echoing with malevolence. "But now that you're here, perhaps you can join my collection." Holly grabbed a palette knife from her bag, slashing at the nearest portrait. To her horror, the figure in the painting screamed as if in agony, and the canvas bled. Nathaniel roared in fury, his eyes burning with dark power. "You've meddled with forces beyond your understanding," he hissed. Desperate, Holly slashed at more paintings, each one releasing a tortured soul. The spirits began to swirl around Nathaniel, their voices rising in a cacophony of rage and pain. The house shook, and shadows writhed like living things. Realizing she needed to destroy Eliza's portrait to free her, Holly fought through the chaos to the painting. Nathaniel lunged at her, but the freed spirits held him back, their spectral hands clawing at his flesh. Holly plunged the palette knife into Eliza's portrait, ripping it apart. With a final, ear-piercing scream, Nathaniel was consumed by the spirits, his body disintegrating into a cloud of ash. The house trembled violently, and Holly fled, barely escaping as it collapsed into a smoldering ruin. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Holly watched as the freed spirits ascended into the sky, their faces peaceful at last. Among them she saw Eliza, who smiled and mouthed the words "thank you." Exhausted and shaken, Holly returned to her studio. She vowed never to paint another portrait of the dead, but the island had one last secret to reveal. On her easel, untouched by human hands, was a final painting, Nathaniel Blackwood, trapped in his own portrait, his eyes wide with eternal terror. Holly smiled grimly. She knew that some spirits deserved no peace. Holly couldn't shake the lingering unease that settled over her in the weeks following her encounter with Nathaniel Blackwood. The portrait of Nathaniel, with his eyes filled with terror, stood prominently in her studio, a grim reminder of the power she had unwittingly wielded. Despite her vow, whispers of her abilities persisted, attracting attention from both near and far. One stormy evening, as thunder rumbled across the Isle of Wight and rain battered her studio's windows, there was another knock at her door. Dread coiled in Holly's stomach as she opened it, half expecting another dark figure from her nightmares. Instead, a middle-aged woman, drenched from the rain, stood before her, clutching a soaked photograph. "Please," the woman pleaded, her voice trembling. "I heard you can paint the dead, my daughter. I need to see her again." Holly's resolve wavered. The woman's desperation tugged at her heartstrings, but the horrors she had faced made her wary. She hesitated, but ultimately allowed the woman inside. The photograph showed a young girl, her smile radiant and innocent. Holly felt a pang of sorrow and guilt. As Holly painted, the atmosphere in the studio grew thick with an almost palpable energy. She felt a presence watching her, but it wasn't malevolent like before. It was as if the young girl's spirit hovered nearby, eager to be seen and remembered. When the portrait was complete, the girl's face seemed to glow with life, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. The woman wept upon seeing the portrait, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." For a moment, Holly felt at peace. Perhaps her gift wasn't solely a curse. Maybe, just maybe, she could use it to bring comfort to those left behind. But as the woman left, Holly felt a chill run down her spine. The air grew cold, and the shadows in her studio deepened. That night, Holly dreamt of Nathaniel. He stood in the ruins of his mansion, surrounded by the souls he had tormented. His eyes were filled with a burning hatred. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "This is far from over. You have no idea what you've unleashed." Holly awoke with a start, her heart pounding. She knew Nathaniel's threat wasn't empty. Dark forces had been drawn to her, and they wouldn't rest until they had claimed her abilities for themselves. She needed to understand the true nature of her gift and find a way to protect herself. Determined, Holly sought out the island's oldest residents, those who might know about the history and lore of the Isle of Wight. She met with Mrs. Penrose, a local historian and folklorist who had spent her life collecting stories and legends. "Ah, the phantom portrait painter," Mrs. Penrose mused, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "I've heard the tales. It's said that certain individuals can capture the essence of a soul on canvas, but this gift is a double-edged sword. It attracts those who seek to manipulate the veil between life and death." Mrs. Penrose revealed that such powers had been rare throughout history, but they were always met with danger. "The spirits you paint are drawn to you, for better or worse, and there are always those who wish to exploit such power." Holly learned of an ancient ritual, one that could help her control her gift and shield her from malevolent forces. The ritual required a sacred place, a convergence of natural energies, where the veil between worlds was at its thinnest. There was a cave on the island, hidden deep within the forest, said to be a nexus of such energies. Armed with this knowledge, Holly set out to find the cave. The journey was treacherous, the path overgrown and forgotten by time. As she ventured deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around her, and the air grew thick with a supernatural presence. After hours of searching, Holly finally found the cave. It was a dark, yawning maw in the earth, with ancient symbols carved into the stone around its entrance. Inside, the air was cool and damp, and a faint, ethereal glow illuminated the cavern. Holly set up her easel and canvas in the heart of the cave. She began the ritual, painting symbols of protection and invoking the spirits of the island to aid her. As she painted, she felt a powerful force coursing through her, connecting her to the very essence of the Isle of Wight. Suddenly, the cave trembled, and a cold wind swept through, extinguishing her lantern. In the darkness she saw them, the spirits she had painted, the souls she had captured. They surrounded her, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "Help us," they whispered. "Set us free." With a deep breath, Holly continued the ritual, her hands moving with a purpose beyond her understanding. She painted the final symbol, a mark of release, on the canvas. A blinding light filled the cave, and the spirits cried out in unison. When the light faded, Holly found herself alone in the cave. The spirits were gone, and the oppressive weight she had felt lifted. She knew she had done something monumental. She had given the spirits peace and, in doing so, had taken control of her gift. Holly returned to her studio, feeling a newfound strength. She understood now that her power was not just a curse but a responsibility. She could bring comfort to the grieving and help lost souls find their way. And as for the dark forces that sought to control her, she was ready for them. In the quiet of her studio, Holly set up a fresh canvas. She no longer feared the spirits that might come to her. She welcomed them, offering them a chance for peace and closure. As she dipped her brush into the paint, she felt the presence by her side, a warm, comforting presence. She smiled, knowing she was no longer alone in her journey. The Isle of Wight held many secrets, but Holly Arnold was no longer afraid of them. She had become the phantom portrait painter, a guardian of the spirits, and she would use her gift to protect both the living and the dead. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.